Welcome to Robert's Rules 101. I've been asked to do a bit of a series of individual workshops exploring how we use Robert's Rules of Order to make our meetings more effective and efficient. And that's really what this whole process is all about. Parliamentary process is about getting things done in less time, especially when you have a group and you're trying to get business done for an organization. It doesn't matter if it's a nonprofit or a for-profit organization, it does not matter. The rules really work out the same. So let's get to it. What is it about Robert's Rules, and how does all this stuff work? And this is the first in a series, and there's a lot of material, and I'm going to break it down. Feel free to jump from one to the other. Today's session, we're going to be introducing basic principles and some terminology. That's what we're doing in episode 1. So where do Robert's Rules come from? Well, they come from a fellow whose last name is, I know it's hard to believe, Roberts. And he was an officer in the U.S. Army. He moved around a lot. He had an unusual hobby. His hobby was getting to know the local community that he was stationed in, and he would dive into the local politics of that community. And as a result, he was really a witness to a lot of different meetings, and he was struck at how differently they were all handled. And so he did some research, and he sat down in the winter of 1876. This is quite a long time ago. And he wrote out what he called the Manual of Rules of Order. Tried to get the book published. No one would publish it. He said, well, I'll publish it myself. So he saved money. He had it printed. And when he took the manual to the printer, by mistake, a big mistake was made. He didn't catch it, because the printer embossed all the books, Robert's Rules of Order. And it's stuck. It's never been changed after that point. So in terms of principles, the rules of the road, when we talk about parliamentary process, we talk about Robert's Rules of Order, there's some basic ideas that we want to take into account. First, votes are counted equally. Usually by show of hands, can be done by ballot, but votes are counted equally. All members, and we use the word assembly at times, have the right to a free and fair debate. Absent members are not forgotten, and they have rights. And at every stage of the meeting, the members, the individuals that make up the group, must understand the meaning and the potential consequences of any business that's being proposed. Now, we use words like motion, we'll talk about that in a minute, or question, something that's being considered. Rules of the road. The majority of the members have the right to make a decision. At some point, a decision will be made. And it'll be made by the majority. On the other hand, those that are in the minority have the right to be protected and to have their voices heard on an issue. So there exists a shared duty between the leader of the meeting and those that are members of the group. And so they actively participate together to create the parliamentary process. Basically, if you have a leader who understands the parliamentary process and the members don't, you have trouble. If you don't have a leader that understands the parliamentary process but the members do, you've got trouble. For the system to work, everyone needs to have a working knowledge of how Robert's Rules of Order works. Now, in terms of terminology, the language of Roberts starts with the concept of a motion, or what we call a main motion. Sometimes it's referred to as the question. And what this is all about is that this is a formal proposal for an action that's going to be taken by the group. So nothing happens until someone makes a motion, a proposal for action. Now, in all of this, there has to be someone directing traffic. That would be the presiding officer, the meeting leader. Now, I want to just dwell a minute on this concept of the presiding officer as a traffic cop. They direct traffic. They don't usually, when you think about a traffic cop, they don't usually ask for help. They put up their hand for stop, and they'll motion when cars can go. They don't ask for help. They don't ask for advice. They make a series of decisions. Stop. Go ahead. And really, there is no difference between a traffic cop and a presiding officer. Now, this position, the leadership position, can be referred by a whole variety of titles, but they all mean the same thing, whether or not it's a chairman, chairperson, the chair, Madam Chair, Mr. Chair, the President, the Speaker, Mr. or Madam President. All these titles basically talk about the fact that there's a presiding officer, one person, directing traffic. Now, in terms of terminology, every organization, whether it realizes or not, invariably has a set of written rules. If it's a corporation, it's contained within the Articles of Incorporation. If it's a condominium, it's within the declaration or the bylaws. A lot of nonprofit groups will have a constitution. And basically, there are rules written down at the time the organization was created. So whoever is the meeting leader and the participants, they should all take the time before the meeting to read these bylaws and obtain a working knowledge of the written rules of the organization. Contained within the bylaws probably is the definition of a term called quorum. Quorum is the minimum number of members needed to legally transact business. So let's be clear here. Lots of meetings take place without quorum, and that's just fine. Quorum comes into play, though, whenever there's money involved. And so as a parliamentarian, you're always looking at the agenda, which items are related to money, and those are the ones that need to have a little more attention and scrutiny and need to fit within the rules of parliamentary process. So if your constitution says that you must have half of the members present to constitute quorum, then that's what you require. I've actually seen in some cases corporations where someone, with a bit of humor, will define quorum to be the number of people present at a meeting to make it easy to establish quorum. So it depends on how the bylaws were drafted for the organization. In the absence of such things, you really should have 50 plus 1% of the members present to legally constitute business. The troublemakers are standing rules. These are practices that develop in an organization over time. Invariably, they're unwritten. And I always make a point that they should be documented and circulated. So if you have a standing rule, that everyone in the room understands how to work with it. Now, what would be a standing rule? What would one of these things be? Well, for example, a good standing rule is that if you have a motion to present and it's more than 10 words, that you, as a standing rule, must write it out in advance. The time you're giving the motion, you have to pass the written text of the motion to the secretary, so the poor person that's recording the minutes for the meeting has a fighting chance of entering correctly the words for your motion. So that is a good practice, a good standing rule. That's what they're meant for. So let's talk about the traffic cop, the presiding officer, the person who's in charge. Now, here's the first rule. And I say this to everyone that takes one of my classes on parliamentary process. The presiding officer can do anything they want, but, there's a but in there. They do it at the leisure and the convenience of their assembled group. They need to have respect from the floor, from the group, from the members. And if they take advantage of their position, they are always at risk that there's a motion to appeal. We're learning about this in episodes to come, in which if the motion is introduced, it's seconded, it's passed, whatever the decision made by the chair has been made, it is reversed. And so this is also referred to as challenge to the chair. And so there's a bit of a balancing act going on here, isn't there? So the presiding officer can take liberties, but they must do so in such a way not to offend the members. What's an example of this? A good example is that I always, when I'm in the role of being the chair, ladies and gentlemen, the minutes have been circulated. I think we've all had an opportunity to read them. Is there anyone on the floor that would like to make a motion that the minutes be adopted as circulated? Now, if I get someone to make the motion, oh, is there a second here? Are we ready to vote? Let's vote on that. I've really rushed it along a little bit. But if I know my group of members, I know they've reviewed the minutes, then I probably will be successful in getting it passed in that way, even though I didn't follow all the formal perfect processes, but because I'm the chair, I can do anything I want if I have the acceptance of the floor. So that's something you have to really get practice with, that balancing act. And it takes time to develop that feel, but there's an element there, and you can save a lot of time if you do your processes in a fair and impartial way. Considerations for the chair, for the presiding officer, is that the chair must seem to be fair and impartial. You really can't pick sides. The chair has to always remember that they're at the leisure of the group. They're not the boss. The chair must hold the respect of the floor. If you lose control, you've lost control. People respect you, they'll work with you. And as the chair, as being the traffic cop, it's not the secretary's job to keep track of what's going on. It's the presiding officer's job. They instruct the secretary what goes in the record. So what are the duties, the job, if you will, of the chair? Well, it's their job to call the meeting to order at the date and time set out in the notice for the meeting. It is their job to announce agenda items. It is their job to recognize, and that's the power of the chair, to recognize who gets to speak, one at a time. It is their job to state and put to a vote all motions and declare whether or not they are failed, approved, or potentially referred to committee. The job of the chair is to make sure there are no frivolous, dilatory motions that waste time. And he does that through the power to recognize people to speak. Chair has the power to enforce rules. we'll learn about that as we learn Robert's rules to a greater extent. It's their job to expedite business, especially if the agenda has time slots put against each item. It's the chair's responsibility to decide upon questions of order. We're going to talk about this in future episodes. It is their job to instruct what goes into the formal record that's maintained by the secretary, and it's their job to declare when the meeting is adjourned. So there we have it. Our first episode about Robert's Rules. There's going to be a few in this series. If I can predict the future, no question about it. But remember, once you start adopting, practicing, and using Robert's Rules, you will find you're getting more done in less time. Isn't that what it's all about? Look forward to seeing you on our next episode.